welcome to another video. Today we will touch upon big tech's abusive behavior. We will not touch upon to which extent they are guilty. We will leave that to another video. But we need to address what I believe is somewhat overlooked, the potential motive for acting abusive. I actually believe that this motive is overlooked not only in general, but also with the regulators. And I believe they to some extent cloud the ability to act against what is truly anti-competitive behavior. Most of the big tech companies operate on what we call two-sided markets, where the revenue generated on one side of the markets can be used to support a very low price, if not a price of zero on the other side of the markets. We don't normally use the word free because there is no such thing as a free lunch. Therefore, most economists would prefer that we just say the price of zero. But for all practical purposes, you as the end user will experience that these services are free because they are paid by somebody else that could be advertisers. Besides offering services for free or at the price of zero, if you prefer that, they have very often also developed quite substantial and advanced ecosystems where a large number of services are offered for free, often of complementary in nature, and sometimes even where some of the services could be considered alternative. This is very important to understand because it translates directly into the motive. It appears that all of the GAFA companies, that is Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, and other big tech companies have developed quite advanced ecosystems where they more or less try to cover all possible utilization of the internet. It is therefore correct when they claim that quite often competition is between them and takes the form of an ecosystem where you more or less subscribe to one supplier and then you also accept the full bundle of ecosystems. This is very important because, as I already indicated, it translates into the motive for acting abusive. A prime example of this ecosystem is Google. You might not know it, but Google is offering a very large number of services and products. If you go on Google and Google it, you will find out that they're offering 271 services and products. I'm not in a position to verify to which extent this is the correct number, but it does actually sound plausible. You probably know many of these, such as Gmail or YouTube, and of course Google Chrome and Google Search, where Google Chrome is an internet browser and Google Search is the actual gateway to the internet. I don't know to which extent you're using them, but I would make a qualified guess and say you probably do. But beside these names and brands I've already mentioned, they are offering a very large number of other services. I could also mention Google Maps. Most of the 271 services offered by Google are unprofitable. That means they cannot generate a revenue directly from the service. What Google actually makes money on is selling advertisement, either through sponsored links or ads that they place on others' domain address, and then they manage it, and they make a quite substantial revenue from these ads. That does not mean that the free services does not represent a value to Google, because they help them collecting personal data, which then can be monetized as part of the advertisement business. Another ecosystem centered on ads is Facebook, or as it is called today, Meta. They are offering a very large number of services I have not been able to identify the number of services, but according to Google, once again, Facebook or Meta is holding 94 different companies, which means the probably is offering almost 100 different services. Most of these are not really generating any direct profits, as 85% of Facebook or Meta's income comes from selling advertisement. However, many of these services also allow Facebook and Meta to collect information about the users, which then can be turned into a profit as part of the ad business. Facebook's core business is, of course, still selling ads. However, they are also starting to move into other segments, like, for instance, offering virtual reality glasses. And I believe that this is part of their strategy of creating what they call a metaverse that connects you through the virtual reality glasses and Facebook and other Facebook properties. The extent to which you are comfortable sharing your private data is a personal matter. However, on the balance, it's pretty obvious that Google and Facebook is offering tremendous value to the users by providing a number of completely, or in principle, completely free services that are subsidized through ads. So if you want the free services, you must accept either the ad or, as a minimum, giving up certain information. Facebook as well as Google are offering different kind of privacy settings, and you can of course adjust this to limit the number of information you surrender. The deployment of ecosystem is not confined to ad-based business model. Microsoft is also deploying a quite advanced ecosystem, and they do not finance the activity using ads. Originally, Microsoft's core business was, of course, operating system Windows and a number of products sold through Windows. However, as of today, they have a much more diversified portfolio. You could of course argue that Microsoft is older than Google and Facebook, and by this has had more time to diversify their portfolio. However, what is notable and important to observe is how not all, but many of the services offered by Microsoft is actually part of an ecosystem that are just as advanced and big as Google and Facebook's. Even Amazon has developed an ecosystem. At the core is, of course, the web store, but they are also offering delivery. And if you're a member of Prime, it is actually free, at least in US. But beside the web store and free delivery of products, they're also developing and selling movies on demand. And they have recently acquired a movie studio for the purpose of developing this part of the business. All of these companies are subject to investigations by the competition authorities, but probably none as intense as Google, who already has been issued massive fines. So in the remaining presentation, I'm mostly going to concentrate on Google. There are many antitrust investigations into Google, but the most interesting in respect to today's presentation is, of course, Google Shopping and Google Android. Google Shopping was delivered by the European Community in 2017 and upheld on appeal in 2021. In Google Shopping, Google tried to monopolize a separate service, and the separate service was something called comparison shopping, which essentially is a way for you as consumer to identify potential sellers of different kind of products. You type in a product, and the comparison shopping navigate the internet and identify places where you can acquire that. And Google has tried to monopolize that by engaging in self-favoring and maliciously downgrading of competing offering for the purpose of making certain that it was its own offering that was used. Google Android, here the Google Android was delivered by the European Commission in 2018, and it is currently pending before the General Court, and we expect a ruling in September 2022. In Google Android, Google has licensed its operating system, that's the Android, for free, only subject to the requirement that different Google products was pre-installed, more specific Google Search and Google Chrome, and that was tying, and the Commission identified that as abusive, and as I said, it is currently pending before the General Court. I have made and uploaded a separate video detailing Google Shopping, but what is interesting for today's presentation is the motive. The European Commission identified a double motive. The first was, as already indicated, to monopolize a separate service. General searches are in principle unprofitable. That's not entirely true because the information that they collect can be used to sell you ads. But in contrast, is comparison shopping profitable? You can actually make a commission based on referring you as the end user to the different kind of places where you can actually buy the product. So therefore, it's relatively easy to understand the first leg of the abuse. That is the motive that was related to an ambition of monopolizing a profitable service. However, the Commission identified a secondary motive that was much more indirect and defensive, that essentially related to the fact or the idea that comparison shopping and other services might be used as a jumping off place for attack on general searches. General searches is of course the bread of butter by Google because it allows them to control the access to the internet, and by this indirectly the generously and very large revenue stream that originate from ads. As already indicated, did Google Android came off as a spin-off from the Google Shopping, and here DG Com, that is the enforcer in the European community, essentially said that Android was developed and deployed for the purpose of protecting search monopoly. As I've explained earlier, is the Android operating system free. However, it comes subject to a requirement of pre-installing certain Google products, including Google Search and Google Chrome. And DG-Com's theory was that this was done for the sole purpose of protecting the access to the internet. As briefly explained, a secondary motive in Google Shopping and the primary motive in Google Android was essentially to protect Google's control over access to the internet. In Google Search, this was the fear that a competing offering, in this case comparison shopping, could be used as a jumping off place in order to develop an alternative browser and search engine. And in Google Android, the problem presented by the gradual migration away from stationary PC in direction of mobile devices, that is mobile phones and different kind of small computers. Traditionally, the gateway or the point of access to the internet had been a stationary PC, but as of 2015, almost half of all searches on the internet actually originated on a mobile devices. And DG-Com claims, which I think is plausible, as I will outline in a few minutes, that Google was very much scared by this development as it potentially could undermine its ability to control access to the internet. So we can see that in Google Shopping and in Google Android, The abuse served a defensive purpose, and that was essentially to protect Google's ability to control access to the internet. In order to understand the second part of the motive, the fear that a rivaling service could actually be used to attack the core business, we need to go back in time. We do not need to go that much back in time. We only need to go back to 1995, where Bill Gates, founder and CEO of Microsoft, identified a serious threat to his core business. At that time, Microsoft's core business was, of course, the operating system Windows, and he predicted that the proliferation of the internet would change everything. More specifically, he identified a risk that an online-based competitor would develop an alternative operating system using its existing business and thereby undermine his control over the operating systems. Why do we know that? Well, we know that because, as I will explain in a few minutes, the American antitrust authorities actually started investigating this, and in that process they uncovered a memo called the Internet Tidal Wave Memo, and they also made a deposition of Bill Gates where he touched upon these matters. In order to counter this risk presented by the internet and the risk that an online based competitor developed into a serious and real alternative to the operating system controlled by Microsoft. Microsoft and Bill Gates started developing an alternative browser that is the Explore browser, and they integrated that into Windows and gave it away for free. That means that once you acquired the operating system Windows, you on top got a free internet browser. Later you would also get a media player, and that was specifically done for the purpose of essentially killing the, at that time, dominating internet browser, the Netscape. That initiated what we call the first browser war, but it also initiated an investigation by the American Department of Justice, that are one of the two agencies enforcing antitrust in US. We normally call that the DOJ versus Microsoft, or the American Microsoft case. It was finally closed in 2000, and at the same time we also got a European version of it. We will not talk about the European version right now, but that also included the media player, so we can actually see that to some extent it served the same purpose as the American case and the first browser war. Later we got the second and the third browser war. The second browser war was essentially when Google Chrome dethroned Microsoft's Explore as the prominent internet browser. The third browser war is probably one you have not heard about, but that related to Android, where essentially Google developed Android and attached internet browsers in order to complement and protect its control over the internet. We will touch upon that in a few minutes. I believe that right now we are seeing what we can call the third browser war, and that relates to the Internet of Things, where the access point to the internet no longer will be a stationary PC or a mobile phone, but it will be your refrigerator, your watch, and perhaps even your car. Quite recently, I read an article explaining that Volvo is in the process of developing an infotainment system for their cars, and they have signed an agreement where Google will provide the operating system, And even though the article did not really touch upon the matter, I'm quite convinced that as part of that deal and as part of the operating system, there will be a number of Google products, including Google Chrome or Google Chrome based product, meaning that if you access the internet, it will be through a Google controlled browser. Google is also offering different kind of head speakers that have access to the internet, and that is of course very convenient, not only for you but also for Google, as it allows them to control the gateway to the internet. And all of this is in my opinion part of the fourth browser war. Okay, now you probably ask yourself, how does all of this play into Google Shopping and the motive and the strategic deployment of ecosystem, which I believe is a pretty fair question. The threat against Microsoft that kept Bill Gates up at night in the 90s did never really come about, or it did not come about initially. That might be attributable to the fact that he not only started the first browser war but also won it. However, in 2009, an alternative operating system did actually come about, and that is the Chrome operating systems. And that means that when you buy a computer today, you can either get it with a Microsoft operating system, that would be Windows, Windows 11 if you are a private user, or you can get it with a Chrome operating system. There are of course alternatives, you could get an Apple, then you would have a different operating system. But the main two operating systems available for home computers are either Windows or Chrome. And Chrome is of course based on Google's products. The threat against Google came about in 2007 when Apple and Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone and the smartphone, which included a much more easy and convenient way of navigating the internet. I don't have compounded figures explaining how people access the internet, but have been managed to identify a proxy, that is how people get access to news. And as you can see on the left, that completely changed in 2007, where you can see a strong jump in the use of the internet to get access to news. And that is, of course, linked with the fact that on a smartphone, you can just simply swipe, and then you instantly get access to news. Now, what did Google do to address this? Well, they essentially developed the Android system. Google did not invent the Android system, that was somebody else. Google acquired, but they subsequently very aggressively rolled it out by essentially making it available for free to all smartphone producers, meaning that as of today, we essentially have two operating systems. We have Apple's that they do not license, and then we have the Android, which they are licensing for free. Not entirely free, because it comes subject to requirements. Why do we know that? Well, that's because DG.com opened the Google Android investigation in 2015, and they delivered a decision on that in 2018. And here they essentially established that Google, as part of the license requirement, says, well, the Android system is free and you don't have to pay any fee in order to use it on the smartphones that you produce and sell. However, you must pre-install a number of Google offerings, including Google Chrome and Google Search, and thereby they made certain that on all smartphones that use the Android as the operating system, Google products was also pre-installed and the default operation. And by this, they made certain that they control the online mobile-based access points. Now, as I explained initially, did Google go to court with the Google shopping decision, and in a ruling delivered in November 2021, the General Court almost upheld all of DGCOM's findings. However, they also added some notable observations and qualification. But what is most important in terms of the two motive, that was the ambition to monopolize a profitable service, and the secondary objective, that is to protect the core business, the General Court did not accept the second motive. That does not mean that it is not relevant. I think there was more question about there was insufficient evidence. And this is very important because, as I've already explained, the motive for developing the ecosystem is not only to offer you complementary services, but it's also to lock you in and to prevent that competing offering is developed that can serve to attack the core business, which in respect to Google and also Facebook is of course the advertisement revenue. In Google's case, that is an advertisement revenue that is generated by the fact that Google controls access to the internet. The European Commission will get a second chance to vindicate its secondary motive, that is the defensive motive, in the Google Android case that is currently pending before the General Court, and we expect a ruling in September. In the Google Android case, the defensive motive is much better developed. Reading it, it is clear that Google had a strong incentive to develop and deploy the Google Android operating system for the sole purpose of making certain that all mobile devices had Google products, that is Google Search and Google Chrome, as default option to protect their control of the internet. Not only is it much better explained, but there are also quite advanced evidence presented in support of it. There are other problems with Google Android, but we will not touch upon that today. We will merely confine ourselves to the fact that we will have a second chance to review this secondary motive, if we call it that, that is the defensive motive, where the big tech use ecosystem and free services in order to protect the core business. The threat presented by user migration is not confined to Google. I believe that Meta and Facebook is essentially confronted with the same challenge. People are migrating away from Facebook. One of the offerings that are migrating in direction of is of course Instagram, which accidentally is owned by Facebook and Meta. There are, to the best of my knowledge, no current antitrust investigation into a strategy deployed by Meta directed at nudging consumers in direction of Instagram, but there are plenty of accusations about this. Apparently, it is much easier to migrate your profile between Facebook and Instagram than between Facebook and alternative social networks. I don't want to be the judge to which extent this is a deliberate strategy by Facebook. I'm merely saying that the accusations are out there, and it would fit in to an overall strategy where Meta and Facebook really want you to go in the direction of Instagram to the extent that you are leaving Facebook. So therefore, it is apparent that beside Google, Meta and Facebook essentially has the same fear of losing their core business due to consumer migration. If we revert to the Google shopping ruling, we can see that while it might be a defeat in respect to one of the motive, most of the finding was upheld. And more importantly, the General Court specifically said that Article 102, that is the provision that we use against abusive behavior, that is not a closed list. Rather, is it an open list that can be used against things that are truly anti-competitive. However, typically abusive behavior involving leverage, there where you try to extend your monopoly between markets or protect it, that would involve concept as market squeeze, tying, or refusal to supply. This is very important because this is well established and mature concept that we have a pretty good idea about how to apply, which means that we can, if we will, rely on Article 102 to police against abusive behavior and abusive strategies when it comes to big tech. Google Shopping was not advanced under any of these, rather was it advanced under a mix of um, malicious downgrading and self-favoring, but it could have been advanced in the case as example as a refusal to supply. In the future, the European community will not be confined to Article 102 and antitrust. A Digital Market Act has been adopted, which specifically, among other, target the strategic deployment and abuse of ecosystems. I have mixed feelings about the DMA, but I accept that it was necessary. But there are certain aspects within the DMA I think could have been approved, but that is not really the topic for today's presentation. Now, reverting to our initial question, why does big tech engage in leverage? Leverage that is where they try to extend the monopoly between services. Well, the answer to that is actually quite simple. They do that to protect the core business. The core business depends on which big tech company we're talking about. Google and Facebook is probably the best and most simple examples because their core business is essentially selling ads and they want to protect that. Facebook's core business is, of course, Facebook, but people are leaving Facebook, and that means that the core business is subject to threat. So Meta has a strategic interest in nudging people in the direction of another Meta offering, which could be Instagram. Google's core business is, of course, access to the internet through the Google search engine. If an different online service could represent a threat to this could actually undermine their business, and therefore they want to control all access points. That is the reason why they developed the Google Android operating system, is offering it for free, only subject to the requirement that Google Chrome and Google search engine is pre-installed. This is probably also the reason why they are so generously offering to build operating system to anyone who wants to make the Internet of Thing happening. This has many policy implications. I will confine myself to a few of them. I think the most important is that these big tech companies are not that entrenched monopolies as we think. I think that Facebook in many aspects is in really, really big trouble, and unless they take active steps to do something, there will not be a Facebook in 5 or 6 years. It also means that we need to take a much more strategic approach to how we see the ecosystem. The ecosystem is, of course, something that represents a tremendous value for the end users, but ecosystem can also be used and abused in a strategic way to eliminate competition in a longer perspective. In order to do this short presentation, I have relied on the number of documents. I have listed them here. The most important document is a paper called Leverage Conduct in Digital Economy that I have co-authored and have uploaded to Social Science Research Network. As always, if you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out. This is my email address, and I will normally be most willing to engage in discussions.